Welcome to the Industrial IoT Spotlight, your number one spot for insight from industrial IoT thought leaders who are transforming businesses today. With your host, Eric Walenza.
Welcome back to the Industrial IoT Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Eric Walenza, CEO of IoT One, the consultancy that helps companies create value from data to accelerate growth. And our guest today is Renan Devillieres, founder and CEO of OSS Ventures. OSS Ventures is a startup studio that invests in the future of factory operations. They ideate, test, build, and invest in great ideas to change the future of manufacturing. In this talk, we discuss the role of startups in shaping the future of manufacturing and specific areas where they're breaking through into this conservative industry. We also explored best practices for building a new venture, including opportunity identification, product market fit validation, and incentivizing and recruiting a leadership team. If you find these conversations valuable, please leave us a comment and a 5-star review. And if you'd like to share your company's story or recommend a speaker, you can email us at team@iot1.com. Finally, if you have an IoT research strategy or innovation initiative that you'd like to discuss, please email me directly at erik.walenza@iot1.com. Thank you. Renan, thank you for joining us on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. So normally we host tech companies, and you're an investor in many tech companies. So we get to have a different perspective on that challenge. But before we get into what you're doing, I'd love to understand how you landed at where you are. So, I mean, it looks like you started your career more in consulting with McKinsey. You worked with Richmond as a strategic project manager. And then it looks like you kind of founded your first company. Maybe that was the jump off. But what was the path that led you now to running OSS Ventures?
Yeah, it's actually a funny one. I was always a nerd, playing with systems. I disassembled my first computer when I was 6. So I've always been a nerd. And so obviously I went the math/computer science route in Europe 15 years ago. And at the time, there was no tech scene in Europe. And I told myself that I had to get a serious job because playing with computer was not serious. And so I literally put on Google, company that is the best at business and creating CEOs. And the number one answer to that was McKinsey and Company. So applied, and they gave me a job. And I'm very grateful that they did, because I didn't know how to read a financial statement. I didn't know what a company was, but they trained me a lot. And my second mission was with a manufacturing company, and I fell in love. The fact that you can enter some bizarre big building and they are transforming matter at incredibly high speeds. If you're a nerd and you like systems, that's like the dream. And so fell in love with manufacturing and operations. I worked a lot in manufacturing and operations. One of my clients said, "Hey, Renan, come on and let's stop being a consultant. Let's do the real thing." And so I said, "Yeah, sure." So I went to Richmond, learned the town, loved my time here. I saw what it is to be a luxury company at scale. I like to say that in the first manufacturer, because you don't say factory, you say manufacturer. In the first manufacturer that I was in a leadership position, they were producing 200 watches per day, and one watch is like 100K. So loved it, but at heart, I was always a nerd. And so at some point, the urge to create and to do software was too high. I was a Linux contributor in my free time. And so I created a tech company where I made every single mistake you can make when you make your first company. But at the end, it went well. And we went to Brazil because the business model was revolving around personal data. And because of GDPR, the business model was illegal in Europe. So we went to Brazil, raised funds. I discovered Silicon Valley. That was amazing. Ended up selling the shares in my company at Series B. So a nice exit. I was very lucky with that also. And I was sitting like at lunch with my wife, and I said, we really should try to put some tech in the world of operations. And she told me, yeah, have a go at it. And so that's when I created OSS Ventures. So that's kind of how it went. But the funny thing is, I've worked for 8 years in manufacturing and operations, and most of them don't understand tech because it's not their world. But I've been working in Silicon Valley for 5 years, and if you ask the average tech bro how a manufacturing plant works, you'll get some funny answers. Like, let's put it like that. So yeah, it's colliding the two worlds is interesting.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, it's always funny when you look at a career in reverse. The logic makes sense, but of course, when you're experiencing
Yeah.
it, it's kind of jumping from opportunity to opportunity, and then trying to make the best of it. Yeah, it's great to hear your kind of fascination with manufacturing, because I think now, to a lot of people, manufacturing, it's kind of this, it's dull, But then when you think about it, you think, well, how does a pencil get made, right? I mean, could you manufacture a pencil? Like, you couldn't, right? You could spend 100 years by yourself you just couldn't figure out how to get the carbon into the wood, and even get the wood in the right shape and all of this. And somehow we now make Richmond watches 200, 200 a day in these fantastically complex devices, right? It's just an incredible feat of kind of ingenuity. And now obviously digital is, taking this to the next level. But yeah, I mean, digital is also a challenge for the manufacturers, right? Just as you said, there's really a cultural divide, right? On the one hand, you're used to dealing with atoms, on the other side, bits, and trying to kind of get those two cultures together can be quite challenging. I mean, how do you view that in terms of where are we now? Obviously, this is a journey that started, I don't know, probably 50 years ago, right? When the first computers started going into factories. So we're not necessarily in step one anymore, but nonetheless, a lot of plants, it still seems like it's really a challenge to kind of wrap the mind around how to adopt digital technologies. And then likewise, a lot of startups have a very high level sense of what a manufacturer does, but actually understanding the adoption challenges that company might have in adopting their technology is also a mental stretch. Where do you think we are today in terms of the adoption of digital technologies into plants?
So it's actually funny because manufacturing, like the IBM, who made a lot of money putting computers in factories when you had no computer at home. So if you were entering a factory, it was the future because there were computers in the factory and you had no computer at home in the 70s, 80s. But then for 30 years, it kind of stayed the same regarding computers and personal computers, and also other verticals such as banking or retail went all out with digitization, while manufacturing was not. There was also another factor that made it so that digital did not penetrate manufacturing that much. It's because manufacturers could make so much money just outsourcing to China or Bangladesh,
Mm.
where cost of labor was so low that it made absolutely no sense to put a computer.
Mm.
And so that went on until 2000, 2010. And now the richest man in the world owns two manufacturing companies. Elon Musk owns SpaceX and Tesla. And what I think also, is that Tesla is to the manufacturing world what Toyota was to the manufacturing world like 30 years ago. 30 years ago, Toyota said, okay, come on, losers, I'm going to show you how to run a factory. And they were having those post-its and those strange rituals of speaking. Yeah, but they were 20 points better in productivity. And so every manufacturer in 20 years implemented some type of the Toyota way. And today, SpaceX and Tesla are showing the way of how it will be. And so, to put it very simply, software and bits structurally will take between 20 and 30% of the added value, 20 to 30% of the added value in the end product. So, a car is not a car anymore. A car is software on top of wheels. The second part is 20 points of software in operations. So in machines, in process. Let me take an example. Tesla today, they are the only car manufacturers in the world able to assemble a car in less than 40 minutes of human time. There is one big reason for that, which is the hull. the hull is made by a gigantic hydraulic press. The gigantic hydraulic press, there are a lot of sensors around the hull, and the press is done according to AI that is not pressing in the same way for any hull. So every hull is pressed differently. The software says how to press the hull. And so it is made in one part only. For every other car manufacturer, it is made in like 40 parts and then welded together, which comes with a lot of issues in quality and everything. So software is taking structurally a large part of the product added value and of the operation added value. So that's where we are going. Those two companies are already doing it. There are other companies well in line to go there. So, for example, Michelin, for example, SEB, for example, BYD in China. Today, it's less than 5% of companies who are already there. And the most important challenge to get there is one, the people and the culture. They don't have the right skills. They don't have the right way of managing operations. So it's very hard to find the talents. The second part is infrastructure. You have a lot of legacy systems, IT systems that are made 20 years ago to do some job that is not the job that they should do anymore. And you have, on top of that, people who are kind of unable to manage those systems. And so if you look at Toyota and the lean revolution, it took 20 years. 25% of companies died. 25% of companies were new and rose to the top. And 75% of companies went through change at scale and managed after 5-10 years to get there and to have something that is at the same performance level than Toyota. And personally, and this is what we see on the shop floor every day, this is what we are through right now. And this is the start.
Yeah, I want to really dive into this topic of what makes a manufacturer more suitable for digitalization, and then from your perspective as an investor, who do you look at as a viable customer for building a new venture around? But before we kind of dive into that, I think it's important for folks to actually understand how you run your business, because it's quite a unique business and it gives some context here. So you're a venture investor, but you're also to a large extent a venture builder, in that you're actually identifying ideas and then building ventures around them, as opposed to kind of scouting the landscape and making ventures in existing companies, which is quite unique. Can you just kind of walk us through that process and maybe a little bit of the business logic around why did you choose that model as opposed to a traditional venture capital model?
Sure. I'll start with why we chose that model. When I came back to Europe, I just wanted to be an investor. I just wanted to invest my money. I didn't want to create a company or manage people, or I wanted a simple life. So I interviewed 400 startups in the European and US ecosystem, all specialized in operations. I had three main findings. Main finding number one, operations is 25% of GDP. It's less than 3% of startups. So there is no deal flow, not enough startups. Finding number two, the average level of the manufacturing founder is very low compared to the fintech or whatever founder. And more often than not, you have people coming from manufacturing trying to create a tech company. But I always tell them the same thing. Would you hire as a factory head someone who cannot read a plan? If the answer is no, why would I invest in someone who doesn't know what a tech company is? So that was the second finding. The third finding was speed of companies. Speed to prove the product, speed to prove the market was extremely slow, 3 to 4 years, because factories were not opening the door fast enough. It's a very conservative world. And because either the founders came from a manufacturing background and had like two clients, or they were from the tech background and they were taking forever to get new clients. So I said, okay, if I try to invest in that ecosystem in the wild, I'm probably going to lose my money. And so I said, I called a bunch of really, really smart people, my mentors, and one of them, a US guy from Airbnb, like in the first 10 employees. He told me, okay, so you have 25% of the world GDP and they need software. Yes. They are conservative, but they are able to pay a lot. Yes. And you have unique insights and you can create a network of factories to create those companies. Yes. And he told me, okay, so just quit whining and build the thing. And so I started building the thing, and the thing is OSS Ventures. And the unique model is that we are in factories all days, an average of 2 to 3 factory visits per week with my team. So we build those relationships with factory director, with factory executives and everything. We build those relationships and we look for pain points. We have, to this day, a little over 1,000 factories that we visited over the last 3 years. When we see a pain point, that is true in more than 40% of factories. And it's a big pain point. They can put massive amount of money to solve that pain point. And there is not a company that is trying to solve the issue and we think is promising. Then we recruit people from the tech world and we say to them, okay, we're going to give you $500,000 and you are going to solve that pain point with those 3 customers that we already vetted. And we are going to take 25% of equity. You are going to take 75% as founders. And so we recruit people who generally they already created a company and they sold it in the tech world and they want to solve something in the manufacturing world. And they take 75% of equity. We take 25%. And it's been 3 years and a half. We started 18 companies. We launched 15. And of those 15 companies, 8 performed the Series A. And we are live in a little over 1,000 factories all over the world and growing between 3 and 4x year on year at the portfolio level. And so that's how, because the base thing to solve was penetration of the tech world, the manufacturing world, and speed of execution. And so we had to create the business around those because investing blindly in companies and hoping for the best, it's not my kind of strategy. So yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah, I love the approach, right? Because it's really driven from a very deep understanding of your customer pains, customer challenges. And so now I can revert to that initial conversation around what the manufacturing landscape looks like. And you used as examples a couple companies, so SpaceX and Tesla. And that maybe if I think about what type of manufacturing company out there, that's maybe 2 of the 3 for me, right? So SpaceX is kind of a machine builder. It's a very unique machine builder, but it's building very complex, kind of unique assets. Tesla is a discrete manufacturer, a very high volume, very sophisticated one. And then I guess the last group would be kind of the process manufacturers, right?
Yeah.
You could also break that down by different industries that have different characteristics. You could look at kind of SMEs versus multi-factory networks. If you're thinking about who are your target customers, what type of companies do you want to be evaluating and building ventures to support? How do you decide who is a good customer for you?
Yeah. So it depends on each venture that we build, of course. But let's say that there is an ICP, ideal customer profile. And the ICP is pretty simple. The sweet spot is between 3 and 20 factories. So not gigantic corporations, more like mid-size. History of wanting to innovate and wanting to scale projects. Usually it's family owned or founder driven. And they are open to creating value at a very large scale very fast. So sometimes they're open because they're hungry and they want to have new businesses. Sometimes they're open because they're dying, like they have competition that is making their business very hard. But that drive to succeed and do things at scale is what really launched the collaboration. And so that's typically for the first 2 years of creating the company. You can easily scale to 3, 5, 10 million sales with only those kind of companies. And then you become an established player and you work with everyone. But it takes time, more time, and like you have to put some processes in place and blah blah blah. But for the go-to-market, for the initial launch, we almost exclusively work with those type of companies. In terms of sectors, consumer goods, electronics are leading the pack. Consumer goods and electronics are leading the pack because they are very, very close to the end user. And as they are very close to the end user, they need to innovate fast. And they have some internal teams. They care about e-commerce initiative and retail ops and whatever. And so they understand tech. B2B process industry is about the furthest you can think from actual digitization because they don't need to. They have no teams to be able to take care of that. They have no infrastructure, and most often they don't have the drive to do anything about it. And so I would say that there is a continuum between those very consumer facing businesses that are very high competition, high turnover. They had to do e-commerce, so they know digital, and more traditional businesses, which is interesting because, for example, what Tesla did is bring a tech consumer centric approach to building products. And they hired a lot of engineers from Apple. And the engineers from Apple, they think of the product as a platform for software, and they think that they can innovate a lot on the platform and have shorter development cycles and create an ecosystem and do all those things. And the automotive executive, they had no clue that this was even possible because they never worked in that type of environment. And so the actual description brought, yes, it's electric, but the real description is how they consider the product. And so that is coming to all consumer facing products. One example that I love is, to me, the difference between digital manufacturing and operations and not having that is the difference between Thermomix, where you can upload a recipe and have your dish automatically made, and a pan. Like the difference between a pan and a Thermomix is the actual difference. And I've been deep into the architecture of cars. The difference between a Tesla and the second best is about the same in terms of software. Like it's 5 years late.
If you look at these, okay, so we've kind of defined the target manufacturer, and then you think, well, what about the vendors that are serving them? And you define kind of the space that you're looking to, big opportunity, no competitive vendors. But I've got to imagine if there's a big opportunity, there's probably a lot of legacy factory, technology providers, whether it's an IBM or a Siemens or whoever else, that probably has something in their product portfolio that's addressing that. And there are probably some startups that might not be doing a great job, but at least in their marketing materials say we are addressing problem X, Y, and Z. And so then you have to kind of ask the question of like, okay, how do you determine that the incumbents, whether it's an existing startup or a large legacy technology provider, are doing a sufficiently poor job that you can actually build a venture and beat them to the market? So how do you kind of break that down and say, what, even though there's 5 companies, large and small, that say that they have products addressing this, I've done some analysis, and I don't believe that their products are properly addressing the need, especially if it's a incumbent corporate that has 1,000 times as many resources as you and maybe has some kind of product there. How do you, as an investor, make the logic work that we, even though this company has all the sales channels and the customer base and we think we can get the right product to market and beat them here?
You're touching my favorite subject. There are two parts of the answer to what you're saying. And just before, big companies are usually doing their best and a good job. From a strategic point of view, we address half of existing pain points where there is a new shift, a new technology, a new way of operating that makes it so that something 10 times better can be built. Not 20%. We don't do 20%. Because 20%, you'll be stuck in product hell. So 10 times better than the alternative because there is a tech shift, because there is something. That's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is new needs. Let me take an example. We are currently launching something about the resiliency of supply chains and the visibility over your supplier, but also the supplier of your supplier, the supplier of the supplier of the supplier, and saying, okay, if there is war in Taiwan, do I still have a business? That's a new need. 5 years ago, nobody was willing to pay for that. But now everybody wants to pay for that. And so first is there is tech that makes it so that it's 10 times better than the alternative or new need. And then when you say, but how do you do it with competitors that are 10 times larger? There is one secret thing in terms of go-to-market for those. Ideally, you want the business that is launched to be doing something that structurally your competitor cannot do. structurally because it destroys a part of their business. Let me take an example. We recently co-created a no-code ERP for small businesses, 50 to 200 people. The whole model is that the implementation costs 10K compared to the implementation cost being 120 to 150K for comparable size businesses. And we say to them, keep your accounting software. Don't change your accounting software. Just take the operations module with us. And so if you look at competition, they are not 10 times or 100 times. They are 1 million times bigger than the 10 people startup that we are investing in. But one of their main assets is that they have a lot of consultants who are doing the sales for them. They don't have the direct relationship to clients. They are going through consultants and people who implement the software for them. Those consultants leave because they charge high fees to implement the software. So if you get rid of the fees, there's no consultants anymore. But the competitor, they need the consultants to be able to do the same. And so the competitor is stuck into a strategical headache, which is if I want to compete with that offer, I have to get rid of what is today fueling my business. And so those are the best companies that we are trying to position in the market. Those that either address an existing need but 10 times better, that's the case for the ERP, for example, and or address a new pain point. And then in the positioning of the offer, ideally, we make it so that it's very good for the end user and the client, and it destroys a part of the strategic positioning of the existing actors. When you have that, it's kind of magic.
So you mentioned this kind of 10x better, and that's a great example, right? Where you have a legacy product where there's actually a lot of dissatisfaction in the market. What technology shift was it that allowed you to build a solution that is 10x lower cost to deploy?
It's actually really interesting because we have 4 or 5 of those at OSS, and we are a team of technologists, so we have like 5 to 10 coders at any given time in the office. For example, for this ERP, it was Graph Database. So Graph Database has been invented less than 10 years ago, and Graph Database makes it so that it's very easy to add objects and link them to existing data structure, which is the exact opposite of relational database. We've all been there with an Excel file, and you wanted to have a new Excel file to talk with the first Excel file, and you had to do manually the kind of this goes with this, and it was hell. So this is relational. And so that fundamental tech shift makes it so that anybody can add data. And the hell in implementing ERPs was actually mainly data structure and then a little of processes. And so by leveraging technology to kill those kind of fundamental blocking things was what enabled us to create that business. And so funnily, the consultants are a human proxy to solve the data fundamental issue to put in place the ERP. But if you just kill the fundamental data issue, you don't need consultants. And so the guy at the end gets a strategic headache because they are leveraging consultants. And so that's one example, the graph database technology. Another is obviously AI. AI is just redefining what can be done. So for example, the supply chain visibility solution that we are doing is relying on GPT-4. And we are using GPT-4 to find and to browse the web, to find your suppliers, the suppliers of their suppliers, and blah, 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 blah. So AI is an obvious go. A third one, funnily, is the mobile revolution because mobile use in factories is still nascent, but you can unlock new use cases. And so one example is that there are some companies that are charging like 100K to do like some camera recognition, big cameras, costly. The camera in an iPhone is actually better than what they are charging. So those kind of fundamental shifts allow technologists like us to find some cracks in the market.
Yeah, no, that last one's a great example, right? So consumer technology that is better, cheaper, than and also has like the embedded software included, and then the legacy or the incumbent technologies. Let's see. Then, another kind of challenge that you're going to face, and you've already touched on this a bit, is the challenge of putting together a founding team. You kind of mentioned your logic around putting together technology providers or founders. Nonetheless, I think that's very challenging, right? So finding the right people, finding people that have an appreciation of also the complexity of manufacturing, how to sell, a solution to manufacturing, and then actually getting those people to join an industrial company as opposed to an e-commerce company or whatever, other options that they might have had. And it sounds like maybe their background might be coming from those areas. So you have to kind of convince them to jump into a new market. How do you source your talent? How do you convince them to actually join you on this journey? Because I think this is a very, very common challenge for anybody who's trying to put together a team.
It is. So 30% of my time is just recruiting. We launch 4 to 5 companies a year. And so we have to source 30 to 40 founders per year. We get 4,000 applications per year. So it's a lot of my time and the time of my team. We leverage one thing that is very important, which is our thesis and what we stand for. Our vision is very simple. Our vision is that if we want to solve the environmental crisis, we'll have to totally change the way we produce, consume things. Like everything around you has been done in the factory. Everything on you, everything that you're wearing has been done in the factory. And so what is your highest change of changing the world and solving the environmental crisis? Is it by doing an app, or is it by changing fundamentally the way we produce and consume things? I think the latter. So this type of thesis and vision and values brings incredible quality and caliber founders because they get it. The second thing is a stat that I'm not that proud of, but it's the stats. It is that we have what we call the 12-week process. So for 12 weeks, we work together. At the end of the 12 weeks, the founder can say, I'm out, don't want to work with that or with you. And OSS can say, sorry, but this is not going to work. We don't see ourselves building an incredible company with you. 40% of all the founders that we start with, we don't end with. But a statistic that I'm really proud of is that after 3 years and a half, we never had one churn of founder. So not one founder stopped. Because when you've been in the trenches together, trying to solve very complex things for 12 weeks, the uncertainty level about the character of someone is close to zero, or as close as zero as you can get. And so that's kind of how we haven't solved the thing. It's an uphill battle always, every day. But this is how we do it.
Okay. Yeah, no, that sounds like you have a kind of a good process. I like this due diligence approach as well. Let's see. And then, I mean, kind of also a tangent on the talent topic, but you're based in Paris. You mentioned the kind of companies that you're working with, so a lot of family-owned, kind of medium-sized businesses. So I'm just mentally, I'm thinking kind of mid-sized European company. But then, of course, Asia is kind of the factory of the world. So I'd say there's very different cost structures, different scales, different supply chains, also different maybe talent profiles and even different motives for a founder. So some of the motives that you were saying sound to me like European motives. And if I'm thinking about a Chinese founder, it might be more direct of like, here's the money, go make yourself a fortune. That might be a bit more the proposition. But where geographically do you focus when it comes to both the manufacturers that you're evaluating to identify needs and opportunities, and then also the talent for the teams that you're building?
So we're 60% Europe, 30% US, and 10% Asia. And when I say Europe, it's all over Europe. It's not particularly like one country or another. Asia is very different as a market. Asia's software market is actually very small. Asian factories don't pay for software. They pay for hardware, and usually the software is free. So the things that are working a lot in Asia are marketplaces and or software enabled hardware. Let's put it that way. You sell the hardware and you get software packaged with the hardware. And so that's basically how the market is. But a very interesting trend is that in the US and in Europe, reshoring is happening full blast. Like there are an interesting stat. There are more factories opened in 2023 than in 2019 to 2022 in the US. So it's happening full blast with the geopolitical tensions, with the shortage that we lived through during COVID, with also the political pressure that is put on all, like on Joe Biden or everything. It's happening, and it's the macro trend for the next 10 years. And as exemplified by Tesla and whatnot, now it is possible to be highly competitive with a high cost of labor because of automation, because of software in factories. And so this is the new model that is enabling reshoring. And so, yeah, the macro trend is clear, and it's here to stay.
Okay. Yeah. No, absolutely. I can see that logic. And then, of course, there's the intense challenge of finding talent in the US and Europe.
Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know as much as in Europe, but certainly in the US that actually wants to work in a factory, right? So that creates a lot of demand for software. Maybe last question here, and then there might be one or two other things that you want to touch on. But there's a lot of companies that build corporate venture entities in order to try to do what you're doing. And you could say on paper, those companies have a lot of advantages versus OSSS in terms of scale, in terms of access to customers, et cetera. But I think it's probably fair to say, and I think a lot of them would agree, that their success rate is quite low. So if you were to give advice to a corporate that is trying to, build their own ventures in areas outside of their kind of domain expertise, what advice would you give them? What do you think are the challenges or the reasons that their success rate is low? And would it just be, hey, get out of this space and invest in our companies instead?
First, hopefully in 5 years, when all my participation are liquid and my paper multiple is realized, I'd be in a position to give advice. So those are not advice. Those are just my thoughts. I would say the main thing that makes corporate venture success rate so low is incentives. Venture is a hit-driven business. It's a power law. The difference between a world-class founder and a not world-class founder is not 30%. It is the difference between a 100x exit and no exit. So the golden question is, let's say you have in your face someone who created 2 companies, sold them for 100 million, and wants to start another company. Why should he or she want to work with you? If the answer is, I have 10 clients and a consultant in innovation who gives advice, and a former regional sales director who likes startups that heads the fund, then you're in for a bad time. I've actually seen some corporate venture being successful. The Microsoft one, the Coinbase one, the Michelin one. They always are extremely careful to craft the right incentives. And so to attract world-class founder, you have to have the best deal. And so, for example, at OSS, my deal is the funding, like the money that you'll get, it's on par with any other fund. So it's not more or less. The access to market, the caliber of talents you'll be working with, and the track record that we have in creating startups makes it so that you're 5 to 10x more likely to reach 5 million sales than if you were on your own. So come work with us. That's the value, and that's the product. Most corporate funds, their product is their logo. And so they get either stuck with non-promising founders and companies, or they invest when it's too late and very expensive to invest in future successes. And so the return is not that great. So I would say that, and it's a brutal business to be in. It's really hard to be good at corporate venture. What I would say also is invest in OSS, but also in some other funds. Get used to that ecosystem, get a lot of information about what's going on before creating a product, and a product that you can say in the eyes of a world-class founder, you should take that deal, because even if Sequoia or other tier 1 firms are wanting to work with you, my deal is better. Like, it's not about money, it's not about your logo, it's about what is the deal for the founder that you're working with.
Okay. So one more question on this topic. Have you had corporates that come to you and say, I want you to build this company, and then I want to have the opportunity to buy it back at X multiple within 3 years if I like it. Because I've had some corporates ask me about that. And it's like, okay, so how do you think about that?
Yeah, if I had $1 each time this deal was proposed,
Yeah.
I would have at least $20. But in all seriousness, if you want to have success in venture, knowing that it's a hit-driven business, why would people able to create hit businesses work with capped opportunities? This makes no sense. This makes absolutely zero sense. What this will do is attract people who think they cannot create hits, but who think they can get paid by fees to create a thing, but not a hit. And so it's a fundamental business difference that is actually, I started as an economist, and it is revealed preferences. Like, if someone thinks they can create $1 billion company, they will never accept that deal. If someone thinks they cannot create $1 billion company, and they think the reward profile of that deal is good, then they will build that company. But there's an issue because you want to actively select against the people who think they are not going to create $1 billion company. And so, yeah, preference.
Yeah. Okay, that's a very, very clear way to look at it, but makes sense. Cool, Renan. Anything that we haven't touched on that's important for folks to understand?
Well, if you are a founder and you're thinking that what we just talked about is interesting and you're interested in $1 billion opportunities, just give us a call. OSS.Ventures is our website. Please go and apply. And also for corporates, there is hope. You can invest. There are a lot of companies able to crack the code, and so wishing you the best. And also, if you want to have a chat on this, you're more than welcome.
Awesome, Renan. Really, thanks for your time today.
Thank you so much, Ike.
Thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Industrial IoT Spotlight. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at IoT1HQ and to check out our database of case studies on IoT1.com. If you have unique insight or a project deployment story to share, we'd love to feature you on a future edition. Write us at eric.walenza@iot1.com.